Let's start kind of chronologically here today. Fortunately, we're here with two legendary NATA Hall of Famers of Lindsey McLean and Jack Redgren. Both are physical therapists and athletic trainers. I just want you guys to kind of talk about Joe Warden a little bit. NATA Hall of Famer, 1984.
Well, let me start. I'll start because I was the first one with Joe. I first met Joe when I was in high school at Hillsborough High School here in Nashville because I saw an article in the Tennessean that he was teaching a graduate course in athletic training over at Peabody College. And I had been given the first aid kit at Hillsborough because I was baseball manager a year before. I chased down more foul balls than anybody ever had. So with being the manager of football and the first aid kit, I wanted to learn as much as I could. So I called Joe. No, I didn't. I went over there. And I said, Joe, do you mind if I sit in on your class? I was a junior in high school. This is probably 54. And he said, no, you're welcome to come. And I sat in there just like those graduate students did. And I took notes on everything he said. And I used, was a wonderful lecturer. He's smart, and actually I used those class notes from Joe's class to teach all my athletic training classes at San Jose State and University of Michigan. I'd made a few revisions, but so I started out with Joe and wound up being a student trainer there, and we didn't have a big staff, a little training room. Usually at the max we had 2 people helping him, and Vanderbilt wasn't a school of physical education, so you had engineers and business majors working as student trainers. So it was quite an experience. I was so impressed with Joe's knowledge, his professionalism, his wry sense of humor. He was a quiet guy. And I've never seen anybody with more skills orthopedically than Joe. I mean, he could reduce the most bizarre, dislocated shoulder within 30 seconds. The guy never knew what happened. And so I learned an awful lot just working with Joe, and he was a great teacher and mentor of mine.
Can you share one funny story about Joe at some point? Any of y'all's knowledge with him?
I can think of one. We were playing at William and Mary, and it was a trip that the wives were on, I think. And after we had everybody bedded down, a couple of our alumni wanted to take some of the people out for a late night beverage. And so we did. And the late Bill Stewart was among those that went. And when we got back in the taxi cab, Bill had maybe a few more late night beverages than most of us. And he took over the radio in the taxi cab. And he gave me the address of the motel, and they said, you can't go there. He said, why not? He says, we have most of the rooms. He says, well, you can't go there because it's on fire. And so finally we got through, and there had been a kitchen fire. Well, I get out there, and Joe's outside on the lawn like the players are. They haven't been told to go back to their rooms yet. And Joe said, don't worry, Coach, I saved the tape. I saved the tape. He had all the tape stacked outside by his chair. So that was rather an amusing experience.
Obviously, a lot of fond memories at Vanderbilt. Share a couple of stories with us about your days at Vanderbilt.
My days at Vanderbilt, well, we had moved to McGugin Center by then. Lindsey remembered Palmer Fieldhouse and told me to be ready for something like that. Well, when I got here, it was twice as nice a facility, or maybe 4 times as nice as what they'd had at Palmer Fieldhouse. So I said to myself, well, maybe Lindsey didn't know what he was talking about, which would have been rare. And he obviously hadn't seen the McGugin Center, and I was very pleased. When I first got there were no student trainers. And so I'd had one application I had to screen. And it was from a young man by the name of John Bright Cage from Portland, Tennessee. And the benefit of that was during the Strawberry Festival, his mother always brought a crate of strawberries down and split it between Joe and I. And we look forward to that every year, because we both love fresh strawberries. And John Bright today is my cardiologist, and a very good cardiologist. He has a reputation among the best in Nashville. And one interesting story, we always wrote the room numbers out in blocks, like 101 to 110. 111 to 120. Well, we were at Virginia, and I got up one morning. I'd always given the wake-up calls the night before. Well, the not-so-bright desk clerk called room 100, called room 110, called room 111, called room 120. And so on. So when I got to breakfast, there was only about 20 people there. And I said, "Where is everybody?" And I said, "Oh, shoot." And I went over to the desk and I said, "What rooms did you call?" I said, "Well, just like you said, I called room 100, I called room 110. I said, "Call the rooms in between there, please. What do you think that means?" And so we had several people arrive late for breakfast, and I told the head coach, I says, "I take the blame for this one." And so that taught me in the future that I should make sure they understood how we had the room numbers written out. So those were among a couple of the interesting things that happened while I was at Vanderbilt.
You've seen a lot of changes, both of y'all have. Y'all seen this profession grow from, probably 1,000 members to 30,000 plus members. What are some of the major changes y'all seen? And then after this question, we'll talk a little bit more about professional education.
Well, from my standpoint, of course, when I started, there were probably 4 athletic trainers in the whole state of Tennessee. Mickey O'Brien at UT, and Sandy Sadler down at UT Chattanooga, and Joe, and then Eugene Smith over at Memphis, and that was it. No high school athletic trainers. And we had, as a result of that, we had every high school coach in Middle Tennessee bring their athletes in to see Joe. And I'll tell you one little story about it, which is sort of out of context with your question, but one player came up from Lewisburg 3 straight days to have Joe look at his knee, and he sent him over to Pinky Lipscomb's office, and Pinky was in Virginia working on his sports medicine certification, and so his assistant, the doctor over there, tried to aspirate his knee. And the third time he showed up, it still hadn't been aspirated properly. Joe just went in the back and pulled out the needle and just took every bit of the fluid out, probably better than most orthopedic surgeons. And of course, that's not exactly what we're supposed to do as athletic trainers, but that's what everybody did in those days. We had full reign of the pharmacies would give you, just say, they'd open the door, let you come in there and say, "What do you need?" And it was just different then. And I thought the profession was great when it was small, because when you go to the conventions, everybody got together in these smoke-filled rooms and talked, and you didn't have much of a program. Probably that national convention program wasn't as big as the District 8 program.
What was the exam like at that point? I know it was a long time ago, but any particular things you remember about?
Well, the written exam, of course, terrified everybody. And then the oral practical was different from room to room. In other words, they had different rooms set up with 2-man teams giving me oral practical. And in my case, I had the late Bud Miller and the late Link Kimura which was two of the great stone faces of athletic training. Well, and then down the hall, a couple of guys had George Sullivan from Nebraska, and I can't remember who else. But they said they just had a gay old time. They set them at ease, talked a little bit about what their job was like, and everything, just put everybody at ease. And I left my old practical wondering, what in the heck did I do in there? And it turned out it must have been pretty good because I passed it on the first go-around. So Lindsay did not give me a choice. I was working for him at the time, and he says, you could be grandfathered in, he says, but you're going to take the exam.
Well, we need numbers, you know.
When we were talking earlier, you said one of the biggest changes in our profession, you summed up in one word very well and said women.
Yes, and like Lindsay pointed out, the first woman to take the certification exam took it at the same time I did. And it just so happened that she and I were in PT school together. She was a year behind me. I think she was a year behind. She might have been a year ahead. I don't know. But, and she was the first female to take the certification exam. I think she was the only one in the room that year, wasn't she, Lindsay?
She was, and she was in her high heels, and Pinky Newell's out in the hall said, whatever you do, you got to figure a way to pass her. So it was a milestone. My feeling about women in the profession is they have a lot more patience than men, I think, as a group. And I think they're perfect for our profession. I think there's a reason we have more women now than we have men, and that they are very patient and caring, and sometimes men aren't quite as good. But it's interesting now, there's probably 2 or 3 head athletic trainers on the Division I football programs. Nobody thinks anything about it. But 20 years ago, Bo didn't want any women in his training room. And as recently as 2 years ago, before he passed away, Joe Paterno refused to allow any women in his training room. So it's always, you're dealing with tradition and you're dealing with old ideas. But I think some of the best athletic trainers we have now are women.
That's a pretty good note to end on. We're going to take some still shots. Thank you guys very much.